Welcome everyone, a little bit early today because I've got a Gran Turismo 7 stream later. Welcome everyone, welcome to Fine, Stevie, Johnny Davis, welcome Andrew, Isaiah, Miss Sandwich, Mark, Bill Jones, Ulick, Vlatka, Ethan, Phoenix, Christopher, Katie, Fafnir, Susie, Jeff, Kyle, Joaquin, B, Brian, Sebastian. I've got ADS in the background, so I've got ADS up so I can have a look. If there are any B-52s around, that would be interesting to track. Hopefully the sound is good, everyone. There were just sirens going off in Kyiv before we started. I noticed today that Sky News have moved out of Kyiv. This is the Taiwanese feed, and this is the Livestream events feed. I don't know if anyone knows what this orange lighting up in the clouds is. Could be fires burning, could be... I don't think it's standard light pollution. We had another address by Putin today. Interestingly, he talked quite a bit about financial support to families of Russian soldiers, which is interesting. So like the B-52 seems pointless, they're so easy to shoot down. I think B-52s are normally escorted. Welcome Rebel, welcome Katie, welcome Junior, welcome Vlatka, Hedge, Chris, Martin. This is a live UA map. We've got a subscription which unlocks a few different settings and features. So for example, this satellite map. Yeah, you actually get it in... I noticed you get it in the UK when football stadiums put lights. They do have sort of lighting on the grass to grow the grass at night. If there's low cloud or fog, you can see a similar thing. So, welcome, Ellen. Ulick saying that looks like natural snow redness. Again, I don't know, but some form of light here. Welcome Goose, not too bad, thanks. Welcome Rex. Google says light pollution. Stevie says F-15 was over the mountains in the east of Romania, then turned off its call sign. Yeah, I don't know if anyone got any further information about what happened to this Romanian MiG-21 yesterday. Yeah, there were just sirens in Kyiv. So we had those meetings between the Ukrainians and the Russians. Negotiations, doesn't seem like anything came of it. Rebel says the light was the same, fast 2 nights. Okay. I don't know one way or the other. Welcome Liam, welcome Matt. Yeah, I mean, it could be one of these things that is a coincidence. Again, like the APC running over the car, I think on the first or second day of the war in Kyiv. I still think that was likely to be an accident, but I don't know. Been reading some analysis about this convoy coming down from Belarus. It's possible that the terrain off the roads just isn't suitable for a lot of the vehicles in this convoy. So they are restricted to the roads and hence they are literally backed up. There's been lots of images of Russian tanks, anti-air APCs that have gone off the roads and looks like they've been abandoned, which might be because they've got stuck. So it's a pretty interesting scenario. Matt, what is my background in geopolitics? I've studied various things around geopolitics throughout my life. I cycled from London to Istanbul and went through a lot of these countries in this area. There's a lot of modern United Nations, etc. Yeah, it looks like there is I guess an armada, or whatever you call a group of ships, moving in on Odessa, which you'd imagine would be a very important city for the Russians to capture. It looks as though Kherson is now effectively under Russian control. It sounds like the mayor had meetings with the Russians and has asked the citizens of Kherson not to fight back, essentially. And it seems like we've gone well over here. The situation in Mariupol seems to be one of the most dire, with water, gas, electricity all cut off. Superbite, do prisoners of war have to be taken if they're injured and they don't have resources to take them? I think under the Geneva Convention they have to be taken in. There are rules about those sort of things. Welcome Skippy, welcome Z. The Putin statement was interesting. I think it was really aimed towards a domestic audience, which is interesting. The fact that he has to address the domestic audience. Again, the war was, or the military action was framed as one of unacceptable Ukrainian support against this independence movement. I really don't think it was a address aimed at an international audience at all, actually. But I may be wrong. Welcome, James. Welcome, MBR. Martin, MiG-21s are very unreliable. I do know they're very old jets. I mean, old jets aren't necessarily unreliable. I think the B-52 is literally from around 1952, and so is the Russian equivalent. I think they're both scheduled to fly until, I think, the 2050s this century. So there'll be aircraft in service for about 100 years. I mean, the design of the airframe will be in service 100 years. Happy birthday, James. Welcome, Sarah. Welcome, Katie. Welcome, Søren. You have to track the F-16. If you give me the reg number, I can do that. I've got ADS up as well. I cannot see. Ah, here we go. F-16 Viper 51. Viper 51. Turn transponder on, exiting Romania westward. Congratulations, MBR. Yeah, there'll be Gran Turismo 7 stream later. I think it's a better way to do it in this order. Welcome, Kim. And been a lot more discussion today again about what this means for NATO and what this means for the current rules-based order of international institutions like the United Nations that have this element of legitimacy, because every nation is a member, or pretty much every nation is a member. Welcome, Adam from Brazil. Let us know what the feeling is in Brazil. And again, this early on in the stream, let us know, anyone in chat, what's your feeling? Has it changed? We saw the Ukrainian president today give a press conference to press in Ukraine, where he seemed to pretty clearly call for a ceasefire, negotiations directly with Putin. Thanks for letting us know what that is. We're going to be live every evening, Milog. And I was trying to, so Russia Today and Sputnik are now banned in the EU and the UK, so I can't see that perspective. I always felt like the perspective that Russia Today gave in its English broadcast was always didn't seem that sophisticated in the messaging that it was trying to bring across. But for kind of a third perspective, I'm finding Indian news quite interesting because there's a really entrenched position in Indian political commentators, and I do think it's a bit of whataboutism, who are basically saying maybe this is a reshaping of the world order, and the current or previous world order hadn't really worked, because although the United Nations, since 1945, when I say rules-based order, it basically means since 1945 there's been this general consensus or international framework respecting the sovereignty of nations. So i.e., nations are sovereign, they shouldn't be invaded, they should be allowed to decide what they want. And I think there's a lot of countries who are saying there's an element of hypocrisy there, because if countries don't play by the Western playbook, then the issue of sovereignty becomes secondary. So, for example, in Iraq, Afghanistan, well, not so much Afghanistan, but Iraq, Syria, Libya. And there's a lot of whataboutism in terms of what Russia is doing now is no different to what the United States has done in other countries. And I really do believe that it's okay to think, you can think that what the United States and the West has done previously was not acceptable or was, inverted commas, wrong, and still think what Russia is doing now is wrong. I don't think those are mutually exclusive. But for example, a big position in India seems to be that India should not take a position condemning this, because look what the West has done previously. And I really don't actually, I'm not sure that's what big states do. Stevie, today at the Welsh coast in the UK there were RAF training aircraft 6. Yeah, it was interesting that I saw the US Secretary of State for Defence yesterday say that they don't see the statements made by Putin on escalated nuclear readiness as credible, and so the US hasn't escalated its DEFCON level. You can see why, because if the US has escalated its DEFCON level, it would lead to another escalation and then another escalation. So there's a very de-escalatory move actually the United States has taken. Welcome, Harry. The other thing is, from countries that are not in Europe or the United States, a lot of perspectives I'm reading is, why should they get involved in Ukraine? Why should they take a stance if it's not their war? Which is interesting. Obviously, I'm much more in the context of this perspective. This is, about the westward expansion of Russian influence. But I'd be interested to know, for anyone who's watching from a country that's not in Europe, are there any voices saying, well, this is just not our conflict? Kate says humanitarian. Yeah, exactly. There are. If you feel like you would not like this to happen to your state, I feel like that's probably enough reason to condemn it and try to stop it happening and support the countries being invaded. NBR UK said they will invade Article 5. I don't know who said that, because again, it's one of the things that we talk about so many things in these streams, but it's one of the things that we've spoken about time after time is NATO Article 5 and where the thresholds are. And it is interesting to think, if somewhere like Estonia or Latvia was invaded or there was some incursion, would NATO invoke Article 5? And obviously NATO has no reason not to say that it would, until the moment actually happens and is ultimately tested. Welcome, Billy, not too bad. Philly said, I don't believe Putin will stop with Ukrainians. So the Ukrainian president did say today that he doesn't believe that Putin will stop until Putin has got to Berlin, which is a very loaded statement. And it's one I hadn't really thought about before because it seems quite outlandish. But if the rationale is not along the logical expectations that we've had, and the rationale is more about restoring Russian lands, and in this instance specifically Soviet lands, Soviet influenced territories, then. But obviously there's a big difference between invading Ukraine that is not in the EU, not in NATO, and stepping over into a NATO border, which is why I think the issue of Moldova is probably, I don't know, I still haven't seen much discussion today about Moldova. They tried precise that with League of Nations. Now it's the UN is effective. Any ideas welcome? Sorry, I didn't see that. Miss Amitch, my best friend thinks I'm obsessing over this. I think there's different people are different. Some people are very gripped and uninterested by these geopolitical events. Maybe think a bit higher up in terms of how could things develop, and some people it's just not relevant to their daily lives. And this doesn't, for anyone watching, unless you're in Ukraine or perhaps Poland, Hungary, Romania, Baltic countries, it probably doesn't need to be part of your daily life. Milligan, I don't think he will get much further due to losing so many troop supplies and lack of plan. Almost all his troops don't know what they're supposed to. It's really sad. Again, I've seen lots of reports on that about Russian conscripts not really knowing why they were sent in, not being prepared, undersupplied. I don't know to what extent that is just a Russian military tactic of putting these troops at the front of the column and being pushed along, and to some extent they are expendable. I don't know. But I think, I can't remember exactly how much, but I think Putin had promised maybe $50,000. Obviously, its exchange rate is changing all the time. But something like $50,000 to the families of Russian soldiers who are killed in this conflict. Which was interesting because is that in direct response to the sanctions? It seems interesting for Putin to have to try and offer something economically when the biggest battle the West is really fighting at the moment is economically. Miss Sandwich, I don't think I'll chill until this is over, and I want to stay informed. This could change so much. It could. It could. I do have a bit more hope about negotiations. There were statements that came out from the Russian side that was slightly positive, from the Ukrainian side as well, slightly positive. There's going to be a third round of talks, albeit early next week. And a lot of the discussion is about humanitarian corridors. So allowing assistance to Kyiv. It's particularly apparent here in Kharkiv because it's so close to the Russian border, but there is no humanitarian corridor. So for citizens of third countries, I imagine they would just rather get out of Ukraine. And so there's discussions about establishing a humanitarian corridor. Why are we looking at Taiwan? Taiwan news has just generally been quite a reliable camera. There was one night where there was a blackout and both Japanese and Taiwanese TV kept their cameras up. You can see it's the same camera here as well. Welcome, Will D. Miller, for what reason do you think that Putin is hiding? I'm not sure he's hiding. I don't know enough about that, actually. I don't know enough about that. Yep. Thinking the same thing, KT. I don't really know the Russian sentiment in Moldova, to be honest. I don't either. I don't know if it's one of these countries that gone both ways. I really don't know enough about Moldova. I just think if it is not part of NATO, which it isn't, so it's not part of NATO, it's not part of the EU, and because of those two factors, ultimately NATO has shown that it is tolerable. I think the right word is tolerable. Ultimately, it's tolerable for these countries to be invaded without the response of direct military action. In fact, let me put this statement up as a poll. Do you agree with this statement? NATO will only directly intervene militarily in a conflict if what did I say? There is... Say no. There is no chance of it leading 2 or 3. Or... It's not conflict is already World War 3. Okay, I'm going to put this up. Oh, that almost wasn't a poll. That would have just been a comment. Okay, your question is too long. Damn it. Do you agree? Bear with me. I need to do what you do at school, right? Which is just to cut all these words. Okay, we're almost there. 102 words. I think I need to lose 2 letters here. I'm really under pressure now. I'm under incredible pressure to do this quickly because no one can see what I'm typing. One character. I need to lose 1 character. I don't spell conflict wrong. Okay, I'm going to spell conflict wrong. Deliberately. Don't at me. Okay, do you agree or disagree with the statement? Yeah, I could done, but then I'd have people coming in saying you spelled NATO wrong. That was a really precious situation. Yeah, it's scary to think what will be in 7 days' time. It definitely feels like the early momentum. It felt like Kyiv was going to fall very quickly. Personally, I definitely feel like early momentum feels like it's stalled. But I don't know. See if there's any other interesting planes. We saw that plane coming from Slovakia into Belarus, returning from carrying nuclear fuels, understand it, or something like that. Can I make the whole stream louder? I think the volume looks good where I normally have it. I can put the background noise louder if you want. Rebel Zoo, that's a very relevant point. Putin would seek to exploit differences for US apathy and European lack of resources. I saw some commentary today that Putin is actually not really anti-European, but ultimately he's anti-America. I've never really thought about that before. It does seem like there's been a miscalculation on what the response would have been, and ultimately Russia did annex Crimea, support these independent regions in 2014 onwards, and there weren't meaningful sanctions or exclusion for Russia from the international community. So whether he thought this would be acceptable, I don't know. It would be a very different story if the Ukrainian president had fled. It'd be a very different story because there wouldn't be a coherent Ukrainian, legitimate, elected head of state to appeal to the West and for the West to respond to and to support. So maybe he miscalculated that. But we don't know. Okay, to be honest, I don't have to answer that. Yeah, I should have done actually, just don't know. At the moment, it's yes 68%, no 32%. You don't need to vote if you don't want to. Ed, if Putin attacks a NATO country, will get a kinetic response. The danger that I've seen a few NATO generals talking. The NATO generals often seem to be quite staunch realists, capital R realists, and basically say NATO needs to heavily arm its eastern front, otherwise Putin will try and test NATO's resolve. So the generals seem to be very much realistic about it in a capital R international relations sense, i.e. not idealistic. Pollock, how about a poll for what we want NATO? We can do that if we can work out a question. Dave just put the surrounding countries in the EU under a special. Well, they obviously Ukraine and even Georgia have applied to the European Union, but that's I think quite a symbolic thing to do. There is a question mark about to what extent NATO and the EU really want Ukraine to be a part of their alliances or their institutions, because at the moment Ukraine is a buffer state for NATO and European Union. At the moment, it's not NATO servicemen losing their lives. It's not NATO territory under threat. It's a lowercase ally of NATO that is fighting this battle against NATO's enemy. So, again, if you want to be very cynical and a realist about it, you could say that NATO and the European Union actually really want to have a buffer state. He would prefer to have a buffer state. I'm shocked that NATO didn't have East heavily enforced. There's been some forces have been ready there. I think the United States is sending over a lot of troops. Dave, I think that's what NATO are doing and showing Putin, if you take Ukraine, you ain't touching anything else. We will see, though. We will see. The danger is that either if Putin is heavily successful here, and it's too early to tell, I think he could still be heavily successful, then he may be emboldened. Belarus may do something that's a bit irrational, because they don't seem to be the most kind of like cautious ally of Russia. And if he's not successful, he may try and escalate his way out of this situation. Mila, do you think that if the president of Ukraine did leave Ukraine to a different place that you would say there would be a bigger issue? I'm not sure what that means, but I think things that could have made this invasion go easier for Russia would have been for the Ukrainian president to have fled, like what happened in Afghanistan. For the Ukrainian president to have been captured or eliminated, which is what they may have tried on the second day of the invasion, we don't know. For there to have been some false flag event that was confusing and able to be messaged both in Russia and also confusing in the West, which didn't happen. Or the general sentiment of Ukrainian civilians to be more sympathetic to Russia, which doesn't appear to have happened. But it's early days because Kherson is now under Russian occupation, Russian patrols on the streets, and the mayor, as I understand it, has informed the Ukrainian citizens to not resist. And you can see why, because if the Russian commanders come to the mayor and say, if you don't tell your citizens to stand down, or if you don't kind of stop a resistance, then we'll continue to shell and destroy. So it's a completely unenviable position to be in. T-Mac, I don't think Putin wanted all of Ukraine until Biden administration started leaking the intel. I don't know. It was interesting how I think it was just general Western intelligence actually. But it was a very interesting situation. There was a statement today, maybe here, that the United States is sharing intelligence in real time with Ukraine, which I think has explained some strategic wins for Ukraine. For example, holding off this airbase at least on the first day of the invasion. I don't know what the situation is now. Susan, do you think Putin could be ousted from within, from the elite? I don't know. I think it's dangerous to think that Putin is weak in Russia. I really don't think he is weak. He's had over 20 years of rule where he has brought a lot of wins for Russia, economically, culturally. And over that time, and even previously the constitution has been strengthened to solidify more powers in the president. So although I believe he is perhaps more isolated, I don't think he's weaker. So it's a difficult question. Again, he made quite a long address today, so the body language experts will be looking into that, I imagine. Yeah, Chernihiv has been surrounded for a long time, actually, since possibly day 1 or day 2. By the way, I don't think this map is fully up to date, but I think the other maps that I've seen, even Chinese maps and Russian maps, are not drastically different. So the Russian and Chinese maps have Russia basically, have closed off the border. But they're not massively different. There's also different ways you can look at it. I mean, the reason why you have these spurs here is because these are highways. And as I understand it, the more north you go in Ukraine, the more muddy and swampy it gets off the roads. So it's the extent to which Russia actually controls territory outside of the roads is a bit debatable. I don't know. Also, the fact that Russia is having to progress along these roads, I think, does present them as a weak point to Ukrainian mobile anti-tank weaponry. Let me check it out, Ethan. I think the poll is closing a little bit, isn't it? Yep, just about to head over into Moldova airspace is a Boeing plane from Turkey. Obviously, Turkey has been supplying drones to Ukraine, these TBT drones. Theme parks, how likely is WW3? World War 3? I think still, again, I'm not an expert. I think it's still, if you assume that Article 5 holds and mutually assured destruction holds, and it's still very, very, very unlikely. So I hate saying this, but I think NATO and USA are the bad guys now. Be interested to know if you got more reasoning for that. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either, Fatty Liver. Brian, has the convoy moved at all? I don't know. The convoy moving really depends on how staunch the Ukrainian resistance is here, and they seem to... The fighting at this airport, and this is where the AN-225, largest plane in the world, was the largest plane in the world, could carry the highest tonnage, was in a hangar. I think one of these hangars it was in, and that hangar was destroyed. There is some video footage you can see, and it looks almost like a computer game of this, and I won't play it because I won't play it on the stream, but you can go and see it, and just burning trucks, APCs everywhere, the largest plane in the world destroyed, on fire. It's just absolutely surreal and pretty unbelievable scenes here. Why that aircraft was still there, I don't know, but that might even be the front of it. We spoke about it on the first day of doing these streams, that we didn't know where it was, but this is where it was based. There were conflicting reports at the time that actually it had flown out of the country. I mean, like, aside everything, how are you doing, like, your mental physical? I think that's a question for everyone. How is everyone doing mentally? Has the mental taxation gone a bit like this? And is it coming back up, or is it increasingly mentally taxing? I don't know. But it seems like the first few days Kyiv is getting better. Now it's every day almost coming close. Once the negotiation channels open up, I've always hoped that there would be more of a ceasefire, at least unofficially. MK, if there's a general consensus if NATO is dragged into conflict with Russia, China would also join in. China's in the really, not sure difficult, but China is obviously quiet, at the moment. Same with India. I think there's always been this reputation that the Russian military has been quite strong. And this might be a clear example that compared to NATO weaponry, so for example the NATO anti-air and anti-tank ordnance being provided, actually the Russian weaponry isn't as sophisticated. It's interesting because new Russian drones, new generation Russian air fighter jets, new generation Russian tanks are very close to being on full production, but are not on full production yet. So the timing is interesting. NATO wouldn't have responded if Putin left Ukraine in peace. NATO is not the aggressor. It's a very difficult question that we are weighing in, and I think if we are in the West, we are possibly part of NATO. Like we are in countries that are part of NATO, we are then inherently protected by NATO collective defence. So it's very difficult, I think, to see outside of that context, and that applies to me as well in London. It's very difficult for me to see outside of that context because this context is NATO is a purely defensive pact. It's not an aggressive pact. NATO would never start a world war. NATO is a deterrent. But if you're in Russia, then you will have seen these countries be acceded to NATO. You will have seen these countries be acceded to the European Union. You will have seen statements about Ukraine wanting to join NATO, and perhaps favourable comments coming the other way, and you will have thought, hang on, here is an alliance that is nuclear armed, goes on joint exercises, shares ammunition, rifles, etc., and it's going to be pretty close to Moscow. And it's very hard, I think, for myself, maybe other people in NATO, to see it in that context, which is why I try and get perspectives from other countries. Thanks, Jenny. I think is that South African? Central bank funds blocked and severely isolating Russia makes things more dangerous. Russia is not North Korea. West ignored legitimate concerns. I do think with the last point. I definitely feel like there was probably this idealistic position that the Soviet Union had fallen, and therefore Russia wasn't a threat like this anymore, and therefore it didn't really matter what NATO was doing because, you know, NATO Article 5 has only been invoked once, the United States against Afghanistan. So, and I was actually reading or watching, I can't remember, statements by the NATO Secretary General who had invoked that article, and it seemed like it almost didn't happen. But I've never really seen, until this conflict, I've never really seen it from perspective. But I do ultimately still feel like militarily NATO didn't start this invasion. So ultimately it was Russia that invaded another country. Welcome, Rebel Line 2, Lieutenant. Good to see you again. Kira, NATO even existing is just antagonistic. I mean, there were questions about whether NATO should even exist about 20 years ago. I think, and someone, if anyone in chat is a NATO expert, someone may know, I think there were even joint exercises that were run with NATO. And I think the Secretary General, who was in place at the time of 9/11 and recognised the invocation of Article 5, I think he had spoken to Putin. And apparently Putin has said at that time, so this is 20 years ago, that Putin was considering joining NATO. And I do remember there being discussions about whether NATO needed to exist. So Benny, why don't the world just agree to get rid of all nukes? The entire premise of international security, the entire premise of there being no World War III is based on essentially the United States and Russia both having nuclear weapons. Robert, Rushing Landgrad like in Georgia. I don't want Ukraine to end up like that. DeVries says, yes, Putin was looking to join NATO. I remember correctly, if I remember correctly, Ukraine didn't actually want to join NATO before 2014. They're pro-EU for sure. Yeah, there was obviously various revolutions 2004, 2014, and there have been governments in Ukraine that have both looked west and looked east. And I said yesterday, you could arguably say that when the state of Ukraine has looked more east, perhaps the West has applied more pressure, and when the state of Ukraine has looked more west, perhaps Russia has applied more pressure. But ultimately, Russia was the country to put boots on the ground. Jared, is it true if any NATO country gets hit by a cyber attack from Russia, then NATO has to declare war? It was brought up by the current Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, which is a little bit scary because those sort of examples I don't think would have been considered at the time the treaty was acceded to. Thanks to Chad. Mark Williams, how easy is it for a country to leave NATO? I don't know if any country has left NATO. I actually don't know. Danny, NATO could be being really underhand, playing long game, donating old weapons and ammo to Ukraine, getting time to move huge military response to border, allowing Russia's army to weaken. That is a view that a capital R realist would say. So if you're a capital R realist when it comes to international relations, you say that every state ultimately acts in its own self-interest. Or block. Atomic Blonde, do you feel NATO treated Russia fairly when they have asked NATO to investigate what was happening in Donbass? I don't know, to be honest. Jedi, Russia feels that once a country becomes NATO, they will never leave NATO since NATO influence will be too powerful. Yeah, again, this is one of the pretexts. One of the pretexts in the speech or the address that Putin made on the dawn of the war was, one of them was about eastward NATO expansion. One of them was about the recognising the statements made by the inverted commas independent parts of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk. One of them was about denazification of Ukraine, demilitarization. So there were a number of pretexts kind of put out there. So it's difficult to say if any of them were the real justification or if it was something else, and we talked about that on different streams. Let me check that out, Daniel. I think possible scary thing is that I think this war is showing that conventionally NATO would pretty clearly win a war against Russia. I don't know if anyone disagrees with that, but it seems like conventionally NATO would defeat Russia in a war. And if you were in a position where you would be defeated conventionally, to what extent do your nuclear weapons come into play, and to what extent do you still play by nuclear sword destruction? Big US, right? Ukraine did not mend relations with Russia. The other question I have is that the rules-based order of the United Nations, etc., is about recognising sovereignty of states and ultimately about diplomacy. And Russia purportedly has been playing by that framework. So, were all aspects of diplomacy exhausted before Russia invaded? I don't know. It doesn't seem like it. Or maybe Russia was making these threats, and in the West we weren't really taking it seriously. I don't know. Yeah, Ukraine after 2014 did make some statements about joining NATO. But again, I'm a bit cynical about whether NATO really would want Ukraine as a member, because Ukraine right now is a buffer state for NATO. So Atomic Blonde, 14,000 people have been killed in Donbass over the years. But again, was diplomacy exhausted then as an avenue to... And there was the Minsk II agreement. Was the Minsk II agreement not being followed? And if so... Look, nobody understands Putin as well. I'm not pro-Putin, but this bears the solution. Jonathan, I can't believe Russia was using old equipment and thought it was going to go well. Again, if it's going to be a long war, then there may be reasons for putting your oldest equipment out first and your least well-trained soldiers. So the poll, 498 votes, is yes, that statement. Interesting. If anyone has said no to that statement, 37%, which is not too far away from half the people. Interested to know why. Everyone's got a voice. Stephen, yeah, NATO has no interest in Ukraine as you can see by NATO not jumping this war now. That again is a very cynical way to look at it, but in the same way that if NATO, okay, let's hypothesize again. Let's say there were further, okay, let's say before Russia invaded Ukraine, let's say there were further protests in Belarus against the Belarusian president, and let's say the Belarusian army was heavily oppressing or fighting back against the revolution. If NATO countries had supported the revolution here, then Belarus is a buffer state for Russia. So I'm probably not explaining this very well, but ultimately I can see why NATO wouldn't want Ukraine as a member. Jedi says NATO has proven to be untrustworthy in Putin's eyes. Theme parks are life. If I'm in the UK, should I be stressing this? Should I relax? If this stream is making you stressed out, I would say don't watch this stream. You don't need to watch the news about this. Life carries on as normal. We are a small proportion of people that are interested in what's going on and following it and thinking about it. And it is stressful. So please, I wouldn't want anyone to watch the stream and be anxious or getting stressed out. If you ask me, should I be stressing over it? I say absolutely not. A, you don't need to worry about it. And B, the likelihood of this causing World War III is still very unlikely, albeit it's more likely than it was a little bit over a week ago. Deathwish and Putin said he wasn't going to invade, so I guess both are not of their word, and hence why agreements to diplomatic streams are useless, possibly. There were conflicting messaging. I think the Ukrainian president sometimes was saying he didn't see there was going to be invasion, but that might be a domestic statement. Sherry, any confirmation of what the huge Kyiv explosion was? I saw the videos of the CNN reporter in front of it. I don't know. I'd imagine with an explosion that size, it's some sort of fuel depot or ammo depot. But I don't know. I'm not an expert, I'm afraid, and I haven't seen. Again, it shows just how big the fog of war is, that there are these huge explosions and we just don't know. Jedi, Russia has the right self-defense, and if Ukraine joins NATO, they'll have missiles that can hit Moscow. Yeah, I think no different to Kyiv. It's a bit different now because of intercontinental ballistic missiles, but I remember there was big pushback when the United States was moving missiles into Poland fairly recently. I lose track of time these days, but like maybe 5 years ago, I don't know. Maybe it was 10. But when the United States was doing that, there was big pushback from Russia, but ultimately nothing happened. So you can see that rhetoric being built of increasing provocations, but ultimately it depends whether you view NATO as a deterrent or not. And I'm not good enough to explain this, but there's some inherent paradox about if you really are a deterrent, but your actions make it more likely that the thing you're deterring is going to happen, then there's a paradox there. So I can't square that. Because if NATO doesn't exist, there's no deterrent to any Russian aggression. But if NATO does exist and become stronger, ultimately it's just going to increase Russian aggression. I can't square that paradox. If anyone understands the point I'm trying to make and has any thoughts on it, then let me know, because I just cannot. It's really frustrating. Rebel, does anyone think the US has beefed up Ukrainian missile defense? I don't know. I know Ukraine is not a NATO country, but I know United States, I believe, has missiles in Poland. Stephen, there is a paradox. I can't square it though. Susan says, I thought it was a cruise missile. It'd be a very big explosion for a cruise missile, so. Trey, I'd give Russian nukes a 6% chance of actually working. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you, but and obviously there's different nuclear weapons. There's one that are mobilised all the times, one that are in, on planes, some that are in submarines, and some that are in silos, obviously maintained in those silos. But again, that undermines. There's two pillars of mutual destruction. One is that you will be hit and there will be a retaliation. And the other is caring about your territory. Sorry, chat, let's try to catch up. GSAF, US would know if Russia was arming the nukes and watched all the movement, knows where stockpiles are. Yeah, I think the formal step of increasing nuclear readiness is a acknowledged step, and there are treaties about this as well. And the United States decision to not escalate its DEFCON level, I think, was very much a de-escalatory step. It feels like a trap, right? Russia makes all these statements about increasing nuclear readiness. Obviously, the USA is going to respond, and then Russia responds, and then it escalates. Paul, America invading Middle Eastern countries with NATO allies gave Russia this. Yeah, that was another pretext that Putin gave, actually. So I think that's at least 4, which is the international framework not preventing the United States actually infringing sovereignty when it wants to. But again, I believe that's whataboutism. I think you can be against that and also against this. Christopher Ryan, the paradox is because Russian aggression is the constant. It doesn't matter what the changing variable is. I don't know, because no one knows what would have happened if NATO had disbanded. Ultimately, no one knows. Joseph, I feel this is purely about economic security. Lorraine, Putin pushed other countries to get to NATO. This is another paradox. This is a paradox on the Russian side. Russia doesn't want the countries in this sort of belt joining NATO, but ultimately its actions here have pushed Ukraine to make an application to join the EU, and the same with Georgia. So it's another paradox. Day, if Russia wanted peace, there would be no need for NATO. Your paradox comes from thinking every other country will just get along with each other. Yeah, that's a very idealistic way of looking at it. I agree. I agree about my failings there to look at it from that perspective. Kira, unfortunately, I believe the only productive way to proceed is to acknowledge EU membership and state NATO reevaluate. Do you mean as a de-escalatory way? The only ways I see a de-escalation is that if Ukraine agrees not to join NATO, concedes territory here, recognises Crimea, and possibly even a change of government. If Russia was not a hostile agent in world politics, there would be no reason to increase aggression. NATO is not an issue to African nations and South American nations, India, etc. Is a good point. Adam Wilder, why are nuclear weapons considered a deterrent? Because if you attack a nuclear-armed nation, then they can basically destroy you. Philippe, do you think Russia will try and invade other countries nearby? I feel like Moldova is a big unknown at this point. I don't believe Russia will invade any NATO countries, NATO member states. But we talked about this yesterday, about whether there's another threshold in which NATO would tolerate another country being invaded. It kind of feeds into that poll, which is narrowing, by the way. It's now 61% yes and 39% no. MK, in overly simplistic terms, NATO is a childhood farting tactical. I'm not touching you, can't get mad. Sometimes in international relations, it is easier to think about international relations as a school playground, actually. Not sure it's right, but sometimes it's easier to relate to. Fucking David. The allies of NATO had no choice into joining. They by themselves they would be vulnerable. Exactly. You know, I bet Poland's pretty happy now it's in NATO, and the Baltic states as well. That point about the constant Russian aggression is a really interesting one. It's going to take me a while to try and dig into that paradox. Jolly, your voting poll makes no sense. Let us know why. Lorraine, most of EU joining NATO now. Putin threatened the world. How can any countries defend him? Well, it's interesting to see the countries that defend Russia at the moment. Again, if you think about the playground, it's sort of this thing that you can possibly tell a lot about a person by their friends and a country by their friends. So the countries that voted with Russia yesterday in the extraordinary session of the General Assembly were North Korea, Syria, Eritrea, and I'm not sure anyone else actually. And the abstentions were more numerous: China, India, I think Afghanistan, Iraq, and I think quite a few South American countries as well. But it was an overwhelming vote yes. So to the United Nations General Assembly, if I remember correctly, cannot pass binding resolutions, but there are no vetoes. So it passed resolutions on majorities. The United Nations Security Council can pass resolutions that are binding under international law, but the 5 permanent members, the P5, which are the USA, France, United Kingdom, China, and Russia, are always members of the Security Council and can always veto. I do think we're closer than ever to Russia either being ejected or removing itself from at least the United Nations. And then at that point, the United Nations Security Council cannot issue binding resolutions because it would not have that legitimacy. So it's a very interesting situation. Manny, what are your thoughts on nuclear reactors in Ukraine getting hit in the crossfire? It's interesting. I imagine that the Russians know that, and there's, you know, the fighting will avoid these plants. I know there are nuclear power plants in Ukraine. You know, Chernobyl is a decommissioned one, but there are active ones. And I imagine there'll be international scientists there. Turn on the poll should have been. You can do your own poll if you want. I don't believe it would have legitimacy because the basis of the international framework post 1945 has been that every country pretty much has been part of these international frameworks, ICC, the United Nations, etc. So if you lose Russia, no doubt other countries will pull out, like Syria, etc. And North Korea. Even North Korea is part of the United Nations. Uses that ability to say the world has voted on this, and this is what the United Nations believes should happen, because not everyone participates in that. I honestly feel like it's more likely that Russia is going to leave the United Nations than it won't, and I do feel quite sad about that. As I've said, I've done a lot of modern United Nations and things like that, so I really wouldn't want the United Nations to have lasted arguably less than a lifetime. So we had less than a lifetime where the whole world was part of a framework. Anyway, it's just my views. Far-fetched. I think Russia would be too weak to immediately attack any NATO country after the war in Ukraine finishes. Don't think Russia's going to attack any NATO country. Not only that, its forces have been a bit exposed here, especially I think aerially, but also NATO has Article 5 defence. Thanks, Train Spotting. Are you still near, is it Bryce Norton? I can't remember. Or Mildenhall. Let's plug that in. So I've just zoomed out like massively, haven't I? It's really not helpful. And we just lost everything. They might come back. Oh yeah, another IL-76. Very good spot. Very good spot from Berlin in the Czech Republic. We'll see where that goes. I don't know too much about the nuclear power plants. I just imagine that the fighting will avoid them, but you know, we saw with Chernobyl that wasn't necessarily the case. I think some of these flights, there have been flights going into... Oh no, there's been flights going from Russia to Slovakia for nuclear fuel or something like that, but obviously these nuclear power plants need to be maintained. Yeah, we'll get that F-16 up as well, Saron. Jeff, Russia hasn't done anything different than when the US invaded Iraq against the UN. But does that make what Russia's doing okay? I really want to hear from you, Jeff, on that. If you take that as a given, does it make what Russia's doing now okay? What is your view on what Russia's doing? So I must be missing something. See if I can locate it manually. Just let me get it on ADB. Viper 51. Somewhere around here. It's a bit like Where's Wally, isn't it? Oh, Viper 51's disappeared. Maybe it's popping on and off, I don't know. Should have a history, by the way. Yeah, history. Okay, there we go. Fresh live view map, what do you say? Red alert in Kharkiv. Yeah, we spoke, I think maybe day 2 or day 3, how the fighting was probably going to get very intense, and it looks to have been unbelievably brutal, and I don't know how the Ukrainians are really holding out there. Seems like Kherson is the first major city to inverted commas fall. Sorry if I missed your comment, Jeff. I really wanted to hear from you. Jeff, no, it's just as wrong, but hypocritical to accuse one of war crimes under a fine. I think it's probably okay to say both the war crimes, isn't it? You can see that for me personally, I don't like this kind of whataboutism. I think that's one of the things I personally don't like. I don't like the idea of being held back by history rather than learning from it, but maybe it's a very idealised view, I don't know. So the thing as I see it, Putin has passed the point of no return. He has to finish what he started. He can't withdraw at this point. It would spell political death for him. Yeah, again, I don't see how he can... There's such a narrow path to de-escalate this, and I feel like it just gets narrower by the day in terms of what he can take back and present it as a win. They can't let him stay in power. He's just going to recooperate, rebuild, and try again in a few years. Yeah, I feel like the Rubicon really has been crossed. Search and destroy. Every country has done something bad to another country. People live in front. Yeah, it depends how back you want to go. Do you want to go back and the United Kingdom back a few hundred years? It's difficult, and I don't know. I feel it's easy for an aggressor now, in the current day, to be shielded by things that have happened in the past that ultimately are unrelated. I don't know. Safik says Putin, if he wins, will never stop. He will go for Ukraine, then Moldova and Poland. I think Moldova is in a very difficult position here because it's not part of NATO. Poland is part of NATO and therefore is collectively defended. So I don't see any deliberate aggression to Poland. But you have Belarus, who just seems to be a little bit of a loose cannon. We talked about all the mixed messages that are coming around about the time of hosting negotiations. Putting in place some kind of stop on Russian troops moving across the Russian plains. Then it seemed to launch 2 ballistic missiles. Then the Belarusian president seems to show some sort of war charts to his generals that indicate the plans for the Russian invasion, including moving into Moldova. If you go back to about December last year, December 2021, there was huge news in this part of the world. I'm not sure it really penetrated elsewhere, but there was huge news in this part of the world about a flow of refugees trying to cross the border from Belarus into Poland, and there was massive standoffs. So the chance of a miscalculation involving Belarus may be a little bit higher. Jerry's Russia is full of resources. I can't disagree. Stevie Moore, first telltale signs of an air campaign before it starts in the west. Be the move of civil aircraft, we will see. Yeah, I disagree about Poland specific. I don't know if you know about NATO Article 5 collective defence, but if you do and you still believe that, I'm interested to know why you think he'll move in Poland. Obviously, the Ukrainian president today said he doesn't believe that Putin will stop until he's reached Berlin. That's a very loaded statement. Yeah, in his statement today, David said Putin did say he still sees Ukraine and Russians as one. Stephen, I disagree. Once he declares martial law, then I don't see why he cares about invading Ukraine anymore. I think we had thought last night that some sort of martial law would have been declared, which may have allowed some higher levels of mobilization and conscription. Doesn't seem to have happened. Don't know if anyone knows if Forte 10 is still in the air. I seem to have lost the most tracked as well. Most track flights. David Silver, Putin will provoke Northern Europe. The question of provocation is really interesting in terms of who has provoked who and who is provoking who. But ultimately, I do think there is a threshold in terms of invading another country. Jay, Russia tried to go in like the West and not shoot everyone, did not work, so Russia can do it the Russian way. Pilkey, according to some tweets I've seen, Putin plans to invoke martial law tomorrow. Maybe there's difficulties with messaging it. So if the idea was that the Great Russian Army was going to roll into Ukraine and reclaim its territory, remove the illegal government, be welcomed in, flags on the street, and that was the idea, then it's hard to... And that was how it was presented. Though to be fair, it wasn't presented like that. When I've watched Russian state TV, it's all been about supporting the independence movements in the Donbass. But even then, it's hard to square how that would necessitate martial law across Russia, which is an almost you almost can't perceive how big Russia is. So I struggle to. Jeff, I feel the lack of outrage and in some case acceptance and even encouraging wars in the Middle East has helped lead us down this road. You can definitely say that if the ultimate aim of the United Nations was to preserve sovereignty of countries and prevent wars, then there have been a lot of wars by superpowers. And it's almost like sovereignty is okay unless we disagree with the sovereignty. And I can see how that's not that different to Russia's perspective on Ukraine. So, but again, I don't think it. It's a very difficult one, isn't it? Adam used to play World of Tanks. Cormac, I think we have a mountain of people in the West with their bellies full to the brim with double standards and hypocrisy. Doesn't make any conflict okay, but the science of the media back then compared to now. Chasm, I've got a few feeds on the left. This is live UA map. This is Flight Radar down here. This is Livestream events, which is an aggregator. And this is Taiwanese news. Thanks, Razor. Let's put it in. Coming out of... oh, that is a very interesting flight. That is a very interesting flight. I don't know where Suceava is. Sounds like it might be in Romania. Okay, fine. Yeah, it's a small plane landing here. I've been to Romania a few times actually, but I've been to this part of the world. Flown in here. Also been to Bucharest. Also been to up here near the Carpathian Mountains. Try and remember where I've been. It's hard for me to remember actually. Creative, I give the war 2 more weeks until all of Eastern Ukraine is taken and a peace agreement will probably be made. It's hard to predict, but possibly. Thanks, Dan. Let me check that out. Thanks everyone tagging me. Let me copy that in. The chat. Got it. Yep, military plane. C-130. Definitely looks like it's heading into Ukraine, flying at a very low altitude. 9,000 feet. Possible supplies from Greece. Possibly going to land... There is an airport here, by the way. So we'll see if it's on the flight plan to land here. I've got 3 screens up, Kazim, with various sources, and also I've got the best chat on YouTube here. Just lots of different opinions and lots of different insight. If you have anything you want to share, Kazim, then please do share it. Jedi, Putin says Ukraine was trying to get weapons of mass destruction, which is the same as, yeah, I can see there is a mirror there. Safi, Ukraine is defending their homeland. I cannot understand how people would like Putin to invade their own home and tell them what to do in their own house. Putin is wrong, simple as. Soren William, Putin's like anything and everything that does not fall in line with this vision is a provocation and an escalation. And even if you agree with him, he just ups the stakes and wants more. Thanks, Lander. Creativity, after finding massive oil reserves in Black Sea, I don't see Russia stopping without the East and landlocking Ukraine. I don't know about that, but you can see it seems like to be like if they wanted to build a land bridge with Crimea here, it seems to have come at an extraordinary price that would surely outweigh any of the benefits because of the sanctions. So unless he didn't believe the sanctions were coming. Johan, if a fighter plane flew past my house in Sweden today and didn't show on Flight Radar, what's up with that? All the planes you see on Flight Radar have their transponders on. Right, let's see if this plane is gonna be in a flight path to land here. Christopher, I think so many people are missing that Russia has nuclear weapons. We cannot treat them like anyone else. It is the ultimate card to play. I think surely it has to be an irresponsible card, but I can see that if NATO puts missiles more eastwards, I'd never really thought about it or thought about how it would be perceived, but you can see that that is also perhaps irresponsible depending on how credible you think the threat is. There must be a name for these kind of security paradoxes. You know, let's say between Poland and Belarus, let's say Poland and Belarus had great relations, but Poland just wanted to secure its borders, so it put some, military posts up, and then Belarus, wasn't particularly worried about Poland, but just to kind of also secure its border, put some military posts up, and then some tank columns. Response. This kind of this military mutual escalation, in some ways, seems a bit unavoidable. Looks like it might be coming into land here, actually. We'll see. Patricia, I bet 99% people here didn't watch Putin's speech. The very first stream we did, we went through Putin's speech. We had the transcript up here. In fact, there's 944 people watching. Let me know if you were in that first stream. Then let me know, because we did go through that speech, and that's part of the reason why I just happened to stream, because I thought the speech was so significant in what it was saying that this was well beyond what had happened before in Ukraine. This signalled an intention to completely throw away the current world order. Actually, I don't know what this plane is doing. Random, is there anyone here who didn't watch Putin's speech? Stevie says yeah, your boy says yeah, Blake's waving. Chevy watched all of them. Susan says yes. Billy was there. Yeah, it was a kind of a... I think you can get... That stream is on in this playlist. You can go back, and I think I probably started by saying something like... I don't know what I would have said about why I wasn't sim racing, but probably something like this. I think this speech is really interesting, and I'll be interested to know your thoughts, or something like that. I have studied it from time to time, Connor. Safik, if they block all banks and food transport to Russia, they're crippled. That is true, but, well, I'm not sure, actually. North Korea has very heavy sanctions. There's been no revolt in North Korea. Yeah, I think, for example, the UK only relies about 5% on Russian gas, is the figures I've seen, whereas Germany is much more reliant. But I think the German Chancellor and the European Commission President have made very big statements about the need to decarbonise and lower that reliance on Russian gas. It's a very interesting plane here. Jolly, one thing you have to remember, Russian war tactics, Russia does not care how many troops, units, etc. are lost. They will keep sending more and more in. I think there's definitely a different perception on, for example, when the West was involved in the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was definitely a perception that every soldier's life was very important, establish their superiority, then move forward, not in a way that you'd be exposed. And the Russian doctrine might be dissimilar at the moment. Jedi, we should be boycotting Russian gas long before this. Raven, I think this as the West muscles Russia and our own Western countries. I don't know what that means. If Russia turns off oil and fertilizer, everyone's done. I think Russia is still supplying gas to Europe. I don't know if anyone can confirm or say that's not true, but I understand Russia is still providing gas to Europe. I mean, that's how interconnected the world is. Thanks, Gleek. If you provide us tracking, and Melissa, this one I think is going to come into this Polish airfield here, I suspect. Landa, think about it like this. Your house gets robbed, so you buy a gun to defend yourself. Then the guy who robbed you burns down your house and takes your gas. Then he does it to conserve peace. I can't quite formulate my way through that, but interesting analogy. Yeah, so, yeah, still providing gas. So it shows just how interconnected things are, right? I'm sure anyone that's got their recent gas bills in Europe, because if you've got your 1st of March gas bills for previous quarter, then they've possibly been the highest ever. Same for electricity. Thanks, Auric, flying over Sochi. Let's go check that out. This one here, no call sign. Oh yeah, very good spot. Interesting. Transponder on north of Cyprus, perhaps? Johnny, I read that Russia still gets 1 billion euros per day in gas revenue from Europe. I don't know. Possibly. Martin, the only Russian banks which are not disconnected from SWIFT are the ones where Europe gets its gas. Again, I don't know about that. I think, David, that if it's this one, it's probably circling because it's a tanker. So tankers circulate, fighter jets come in and refuel. Yeah, we've got this IL-76 here. Looks like it's coming into possibly land at Sochi. Death wish, my gas bill was the highest ever in 13 years at this house. Yeah, so the European Commission President talked about energy independence, becoming how the European Union needs to become independent on energy. Let me know if that Viper 16 is still around. I've got ADB up as well in the background. Christopher, lots of people seem to doubt the impact of sanctions, but it's important to look at what the Russian government is doing. The stock market's been closed 4 days in a row. Thanks, G. Welcome back. Okay, so I wasn't checking the altitude, so it's possibly gone on past Sochi. Let me put that in, Lee. Yeah, thanks again, everyone. It's another today. So, if you don't know, this channel is about sim racing, and over the last year, I've kind of grown this channel to be one of the biggest destinations for Gran Turismo 7, which is the biggest racing game in the world. That's launching in 2.5 hours. And so I would never in a million years have expected that we would be streaming a war and global events the night that this game was coming out. I mean, there's been many late nights making videos and streaming. So it's a bit weird, but thank you so much, because we have an incredible community here, and it's up to me to try and look after both communities. But we are going to be streaming every evening of this conflict, so if you do want to subscribe, please do, and bear in mind that there'll be other content on the channel. Johnny, what if Ireland wanted to have nukes? Would Great Britain be justified to invade Ireland again? Don't think so. Thanks, G. Stephen H, it's hard finding live internet commentary. Yeah, again, it's not me, it's this community. So thank you, and thanks for the mods as well. It's all downloaded, so we'll be there about 11:45. RCH294, let's check it out. Is it this one from Eindhoven? Yeah, we'll see where that flies off to. Again, if anyone does see a B-52, it would be very interesting to track a B-52. I saw one on ADB the other day. So that is one that we've never been able to track, or a Russian Bear bomber. What's that? No, that's not a B-52. Oh, very nice, Katie. Dentistry. So my background is I studied UK politics. I studied American politics. I studied the Russian constitution or constitutional affairs, and for 2 months I cycled from London to Istanbul, and I cycled through a lot of these countries. I've done a lot of Mod United Nations, which is like, what's the word? Play. I don't know what the word is. Not fake, but kind of like role play United Nations, where I've role played representing a lot of these countries. So, just I guess I have a natural interest, in the same way that I have a natural interest in racing. I've also done a lot of karting, racing karting championships, done a lot of sim racing, racing tournaments and leagues, etc. Safik, yeah, I've heard about that. Again, I've seen more talk today about Belarus being included in these sanctions. We say it on every stream, but the fact that Russia was able to launch troops and paratroopers from Belarus, in my view, significantly changed the face of this war. We're talking about a completely different war if they hadn't been able to do that, and maybe the West and the European Union missed a trick with applying pressure on Belarus not to do that, because Belarus is ultimately in a weaker position than Russia, more vulnerable to sanctions, less able to perhaps suppress domestic protests. So possibly a missed opportunity. Rebel, the T-95 carries cruise missiles. I think the B-52 is the same. Oh, thanks for spotting. Oh, B-52 at Mildenhall. Let us know if it gets the transponder on. Like I said, it would be interesting to track one. Yeah, so please don't. The mods are like, the mods have complete air superiority over this chat, so please don't spam. Katya, I'm sorry, but I live here, and I assure you that we won't starve to death in 18 days or 18 years. We survived the 90s, and believe me, it was worse than even World War II. Sorry, Atomic Blonde. I think I missed a sticker. Thanks for the $10. Hope you enjoying the stream. Different views, obviously. Different views. Thomas, I don't think any early sanctions towards Belarus will change anything. They will still proceed. I do. What the timing seems unusual. It doesn't seem like Putin was particularly pressurized into doing this, even if you treat the concerns he raised, some of them, as valid. For example, eastward NATO expansion. So I wonder if there was a moment in time where he had the support of Belarus, and Belarus state was intact, and therefore he could use that because it's so strategically important, or some other reason. But I really, militarily, there is significant military hardware, next generation military hardware for Russia that is not yet in mass production, that would have been efficient in this war, or more efficient. So why he was pressurized into doing it now, I really don't know. Katya, there are 5 constitutions in Russia. Yeah, I'm not sure, because Constitution when the Soviet Union fell Then there was the coup on Moscow with the Yeltsin. There was another rewrite, and then there's been numerous amendments to the constitution that have solidified powers of the president. Jedi, Russia's arguments are legally valid but not morally. Wilson, I can't stop reading about the war, but it's also affecting my mental health. Any tips saying positive but also informed? I would leave this stream because this stream is there's such a wide discussion, which is I think a good thing. But if it's affecting your mental health, I would just close the stream. And my genuine honest answer would be, you can limit yourself to, if you just watch one of the news bulletins in your country at 10 p.m. whenever it comes out, and that's your bite-sized news for the day, very easy to get too caught up in this. And I was definitely quite caught up in it last weekend. You know, we streamed last weekend from something like midnight both days, 3 to 8 a.m. So, yeah, I really don't want this stream to be a place where it makes anyone anxious. I really mean that. Ejidas, how about China? It's going to help Russia or no? It's very interesting to see what China's position will be. I'd be surprised to see China and India move from a abstention position in the United Nations. So I don't know. I don't know whether we're going to see the forming of a new axis that challenges the United Nations. So you have the United Nations that essentially, you know, looks after or has members that are, inverted commas, Western. You know, there are lots of countries in Central Asia, Africa that have been heavily invested in by China, by the West. You can kind of see those fault lines, not fault lines, but you can see those connections when there's General Assembly votes. Creative, I have a level of respect for Ukrainians for fighting and resisting, but a part of me feels they should negotiate a peace while they still hold some cities. I think the rhetoric from Ukraine has definitely been more, what I could perceive, about ceasefire, working a solution, especially today when the Ukrainian president was essentially holding a press conference. Thanks, Ian Staff, for $5. Your channel was a random find looking for Ukraine coverage today. I'm also looking to get a sim racing for find. You are in this smallest of things in the middle of the Venn diagram, which I happen to be in. Or maybe a lot of people who like sim racing are also into world events and interested in that. I don't know. I haven't had the space or time to really process anything. David Silva, I think China will never go against what Putin does, because if he creates a war with China, no one will intervene. I don't think anyone's really thought about a war between Russia and China. It just seems so hard to... I mean, it seems... What possibility is there that China thinks, hang on, you know, I'd rather still be the great exporter. I'd rather continue to exert this soft power through investing in Silk Road and or Belt and Road or whatever the initiative is, and this is an opportunity to actually kind of move aside from this isolationist policy from Russia. I'd say it's a very low percentage chance, but incredible if it were to happen, really. But again, you're talking about, this is more than just looking at territory on a map. You're talking about Sinic culture, you're talking about Russian culture, you're talking about Indian culture, very deep-rooted cultures. and there's Western culture. Raven, I'm curious as to what poll takers are thinking the UN will do holding back. I'm honestly curious. Yeah, the poll was about NATO though. NATO's a bit different. Calvin Owens also in this tiny Venn diagram. $1.79, let me put it in. I think from a personal perspective, there are yeah, I don't know, it's a trend. There are similarities between sim racing and doing these streams. For example, sitting in this sim racing cockpit for long periods of time. I've done a race where I just sat here for 8 hours straight and just raced for 8 hours straight. No breaks. Also having the screens, also having the equipment because people have supported the channel. There's been ads, donations, so I have this microphone and whatever. And I ran ads today for the first time. I kind of ummed and ahed about it, but I decided to run ads. I was in a bit of a conflict about whether I should stream tonight or whether I should be streaming Gran Turismo 7 like everyone else. But eventually I decided to do both. And so yeah, there's a lot of similarities. Dealing with kind of not feeling pressured by streaming as well, which I think you can only get after a few years of streaming to hundreds of people. Thanks, Visual, for your... No, we won't play the meme because that's not appropriate, but we'll play it a lot on the Gran Turismo 7 stream. Mark D, UK's foreign aid to India would actually be 55 million, which has gone up. The thing about India is I think there's a lot of deep-seated, from a political perspective, resentment to the West. For instances where the United States supported Pakistan, 1971 wars as well, and India definitely became part of... I'm not sure about the sphere of influence, definitely became more aligned with Russia. Military equipment as well, but there is definitely a possible shake-up happening. The other specific thing with India is that there are a lot of Indian students in Kharkiv. I haven't seen any Chinese news, actually. I haven't seen any Chinese news. I need to kind of... I'd love to get the feel of what the Chinese perspective is, because the European perspective is fairly similar. Then you have the US perspectives across different networks. Then the Russian perspective, and I look at the Indian perspective like a third. Rich. Thanks, Random, for coming, Corporal. So I don't think I've understood your last few comments, but... So I scroll up, there's a lot of mods are really out in force. If I just not exactly fair to say Indian, Chinese, Russian culture, that's an incredible way to oversimplify mega multicultural coagulations called nation states. It's definitely an oversimplification. But a lot of international relations relies on these simplifications, so yeah, maybe I think I've definitely oversimplified it, but I'm not sure there's another way of explaining that point. See you, Adam. Let me catch up with the news again. The last few streams I haven't been catching up with the news really during the stream. We've been chatting and discussing things, which is like the opposite of what you see on other streams, I guess. But it's just news. Yeah, I've heard that the United Nations figure now is 1 million refugees displaced. I don't think that's 1 million who have left Ukraine, but that is an extraordinary number. I think I might be wrong, but I think the refugee exodus westwards from Syria into Europe was also 1 million. So I might be wrong, but so in a few days, there's been a similar exodus. Not all westwards, a significant proportion into Russia. I haven't seen North Korean news, no. Blackbird, the West will be forced to choose between the uncaring reality of geopolitics or their fantasy world of total acceptance and understanding. Does seem to be some element of, perhaps in the West, a feeling that old issues were settled. So after the Soviet Union fell, you know, the end of history, and actually that doesn't seem to be the case. Maybe that's, I don't know, a idealistic way of looking at international relations. Soren, the demand from Russia of a demilitarization of Ukraine is something Ukraine can't nor should accept. It will open them up and be a vassal and be forced to do Russia's been down the line, perhaps. Welcome in to Curti Corporal. Good to see you again. Hope you're enjoying the stream. Yeah, if you do want to like, do feel free to like. I don't think I've ever really asked people to like the stream. It's up to you. Cause I don't want people to... It's a bit of a difficult one, right? Because let's say you're in the stream and your viewpoint, there's a lot of people disagreeing with you. Why would you like the stream? What if you... if I am putting across any viewpoints would disagree with me, so yeah, if ultimately, if you want the stream to be shared, then like the stream. If you don't, then you don't like the stream. You don't do anything anyway, it's up to you. Can anyone know if the video of the Ukrainian rocket artillery blast and a stalled convoy outside of Kyiv has been confirmed? I don't know. I saw there was a cryptic statement by the US Defense that they understood that Ukraine would be targeting this convoy. And again, this may be just a weather thing in terms of if the ground is too soft off the roads, then there really are traffic jams. Again, I don't know. I can only speculate. But if the head of the convoy is blocked, then yes, I don't know. Just comment here. Sherry, magical thinking, let's all get along and kumbaya, tolerance and sets for all. The thing is, United Nations is based on this idea of no conflict, and maybe it is a flawed... Maybe it is flawed because it is too binary. I don't know. But it's a much bigger question. Do you ultimately believe that on this planet humans can live without being in conflict? It's almost the most fundamental question of all of what it means to be human. Can we ever get to a space where, even though on an individual level we all have failures and we all... It's a very difficult question. Can there ever be a framework that prevents this from happening? You look at the continent of Europe and just how these borders have changed over the years, and even within our lifetime there's been one world war that completely tore up the continent of Europe. And is it if you have that Hobbesian view that the state of nature is nasty, brutal and short, and therefore there's always a gravitational pull towards that, is that depressing? Thanks, train spotting. Are you train spotting? Are you actually on the move physically? Or are you on the move virtually in terms of where you're working? Rebel line, it has been idealistic and this has helped the urge of capitalism to follow low price and profit. But Russia did have an opportunity to open up. I think ultimately, yeah, it's a big question that if you believe that there is ultimately going to be conflict, then kind of under what system would you rather live? And I do think it is true in the West that even if you accept that the United States is the world's superpower, is the world's policeman, and therefore can unilaterally decide to do things in the world, i.e. Infringe other nations' sovereignty, and in some occasions, get that legitimacy from the international framework. I don't think that's an issue to most Western nations, but maybe that's because if you're in NATO, then you're protected by, I don't know. This question of sovereignty comes up a lot, and I don't know. Thanks, Sevelt. See, oh, I combined your names there. Thanks, Seven. Well, let's put that in. IL-76. Yep, this might be the same one that we saw yesterday. I don't know if this is a regular run, apparently to do with nuclear fuel or spent nuclear fuel. But we will track it and see where it goes. I think Hobbes was short-sighted. Humanity has overcome many of its instinct. Ultimately, when you're born, you're still a human that hasn't been exposed to any advancements in learning or anything, I guess. Creative Victor, China looking at the grand scheme will have to start pulling investments from the West and building Africa, Asia and South America. Yeah, I mean, China is heavily invested in, I can't remember what it's called, it's Belt and Road Initiative, but heavily invested in Central Asian states and also various states in Africa. Mark, they need to get a humanitarian corridor set up. I think the most likely place for a humanitarian corridor would be north of Kharkiv into Russia. I feel like that is the most likely place for a humanitarian corridor. Sovereignty is important so far that self-determination is, but a global framework of law and policing might not be the worst thing. Yeah, so this is another fundamental question. Is it better to sacrifice national sovereignty to have an international framework? These are massive questions that we don't often think about. In any event, it seems like Russia doesn't want to play by that rulebook anymore. Al, I feel like what's being put up screen is pretty pointless. Do you mean on these screens? Apologies if so, but... Katya, I mean that our people will pay for this operation with welfare and even fight against everything that is pouring out of us on the West. Sorry, but I don't quite follow it. And even fight against everything. If you mean that the sanctions will galvanise the general Russian population to turn more against the West, then I believe that is probably likely. Rather against Putin. We had that poll up yesterday. Raven, if people don't think the UN will only go under extreme circumstances, what do you think you will do? I think you might be conflating the UN and NATO, but my statement in that poll, which is still narrowing actually, it's now 62-38. Actually, maybe it's similar, I don't know. There's been 1,498 votes. Then the consequence of NATO getting involved in the war against Russia means that you are in a World War III stage. And I don't really want to know what China and India would do in that scenario. But at the moment, their cards are face down on the table. They're not face up. Stephen, oh, it was agreed tonight. I haven't seen that though. I saw it was on the table, but I haven't seen it was agreed, to be honest. Stephen, everyone gives the US a lot of grief, but to my knowledge, the democracy over the last 30 years will prevent the US from intervening militarily. Yeah, it's almost like you could phrase it the US is enforcing democracy in a way, but I cannot. It's very dangerous. It's going to be very divisive to go down that path. But in my opinion, to deny the reality of us versus them relation just to feel safe or take the more high ground is a disservice to a nation's citizenry, as it lulls them into a false security apathy. Seems like you have a very realistic approach. Blackbird, the finite nature of global resources will ensure conflict. This is, again, another one of those very big questions, is that economics is inherently based on scarcity, i.e. the more scarce a resource is, the more in demand it is. And the more scarce a resource is, the more conflict there will be about it. Is there any way of... Obviously, land is scarce. Natural resources are scarce. But the more that you decarbonize and rely on sustainable energy, etc., then you move away from that. But again, it's a little bit of a sad thought, but maybe it is, if you're a capital R realist, that there is always going to be war and conflict because there is always scarcity. Welcome, Southgate. I don't think so. Katya, sanctions against Russia will hit the energy sector very hard and inflation will begin to destroy the economy. I suspect that because the West is able to control the sanctions but not control the messaging, I suspect the West will lose control of the messaging on the sanctions and it will galvanize Russia against the West, and that's what I suspect, but I may be wrong. Justin, where am I reading the comments from? I've got the comments up here. We need to evolve from a capitalistic monetary society to a sustainable economy, and yes, we're probably never going to get there. The first part was quite optimistic, and the second part was not. G. Williams, roofing specialist. Let us know how the roofing is going. Check out Vessel Finder. Yeah, we'll do that next time as perhaps we see more of the ships going through the Bosphorus, for example. So yeah, lots of big questions tonight. I've got to make sure that we don't go over. Over 1,000 people watching. Welcome, everyone. Let's do that, because there's a lot of... I feel like every one of these streams is so different. And it looks like there is a lot of good discussion chat with people from different perspectives. So let's do that time of the day on stream. Let us know in the chat if you want where you're watching from. And we'll see if it's... I feel like it's just always so interesting to see where people are watching from. So let us know in the chat where you're watching from if you want. You don't need to. Yeah, I think there will always be some scarcity. Kate UK, Katie UK, David Silva, Algarve, Dave Nally, Canary Islands. Dylan has retracted the message, so maybe there. Are you currently in the air, flying across different borders? Paddy Wales, Michael Germany, Simha Plymouth, Rog Edinburgh, Thomas Norway. At the moment, that's much more UK European central, I guess, because the stream was a bit earlier, perhaps. Bear with me. Wow, I've got to scroll up. Thomas Norway, Ratislav Slovakia, BTC US, Chris US, Landon Canada, Stephen St. Louis, Jedi Master USA. Okay, so North America representing. Germany, Niagara Falls, Finland, Canada, Jordan UK, Chivo United States, Thomas Czech Republic, Rebel Line North Wales, Cesarnia USA, Matt Canada, Southgate England, Sandwich USA, Blackbird Louisiana USA, Kent USA, Mila Arizona, Elvind from Norway, Ouiju Samo, Washington DC, Kelvin UK, Calvin's in Pennsylvania, Peace from Sweden, Ecomus from the other London. Where's the other? Is the other London Canada? Ian from US, Stevie's in the Bath, Davis from Prague, Dylan's now from the UK, Delano's from Netherlands, Debbie's from Oregon, Al Netherlands, Judy US, Junior CD USA, Manic says hi, hello. Mark James Middlesbrough, Mia 007. I've lost. You got the picture chat. Hungary's in there. Norwich, Romania. Sabin, what's the view at the moment in Romania? Romania, a NATO country in the European Union, but obviously heavily involved in this conflict, really, receiving refugees, concerns about what might happen in Moldova, close to Odessa. What's the view, Sabin, in Romania about this MiG-21 jet yesterday? Deck Poker Club in Brazil, Hogab's back from New Zealand, Loreriton in Poland, Levities from Dresden. Wow, so many names that we've been chatting to and speaking to and following this with for many, many days, which is very special. Danji's from Vilnius, Lawrence from California. Well, okay, welcome everyone. Again, I honestly believe we have the best chat out there when it comes to following something that could be so inherent. There's so many ways that it'd be very easy to divide everyone, but I think the actual fact that conversations are able to be had over this is quite incredible. Not really, Saboni. My Gran Turismo 7 videos get more views than these. So appreciate your viewpoint, but you can take a look at my channel. Welcome, Havids. Blackbird, I heard that the MiG-21 was down by weather. Yeah, I think it's one of these things that is probably a coincidence, is that we lost the Livestream events feed. Let's refresh it. Thanks, Radam. Yeah, the mods are just so on it, and the mods are sim racing mods as well. Let me recheck the news. Something we talked about early on in these streams was to what extent Russia can sustain this invasion. I haven't seen it talked about recently, but to what extent Russia is using ordnance and tanks and APCs and cruise missiles and fighter jets and artillery howitzers that it can't resupply. I haven't seen much discussion on that. It seems generally accepted that the casualties Russia has suffered, and there's obviously varying reports, but if you take them in the middle, they seem very high casualties. So either that was expected or was along the expected deviance, or it's been a miscalculation. And to what extent can Russia really sustain this? It is the enactment of martial law connected with that. Porty trying to understand what victory looks like to Putin. Will Russia and Ukraine function as countries after this? I feel like it's hard to, for me in my context, it's hard to contemplate, because up till now the international framework has included Russia, and yes, Russia has always been a kind of agitator within that, but you know, people have gone to the World Cup in Russia in 2018, people have gone to the Sochi Winter Olympics, people have gone to the Formula 1, people were going to go to Champions League final. It was very much embedded in the international framework, and I think those days are probably gone. Anyway, yeah, for concurrent live, but not for views. It's all just opportunity cost with time. Are there any supporters of Russia in the UK Parliament? There's been a lot of sorry, I got a cough. Been a lot of, I guess, NATO hawks in the UK Parliament. So, you know, perhaps people who would say that NATO shouldn't have expanded, but there's so many considerations with that. Is because Russia is invading now, that doesn't necessarily mean it was wrong for NATO to expand eastwards, because we don't know what the alternative would have been. Oops. So not talking about Russia, but talking about kind of views on NATO. We didn't do a poll, but we asked a question in chat yesterday about how many people knew about NATO Article 5 before 8 days ago, and the answer was, I think, mostly no, maybe like 70-30 no. And I think it's true that NATO just wasn't generally seen as that relevant. You know, there were lots of discussions about whether countries should increase their military spending to get to the minimum 2% of GDP, and Ryan, old Cold War politics still showing an ugly head. I mean, a lot of the ex-NATO generals I've seen speaking and writing articles have been speaking about how there should be a return to essentially militarization of NATO's Eastern Front. Interesting where this plane is going to go. So it's just turned into Belarus, very, very north of Belarus. This is a very unique plane because we understand, I think, flying some sort of nuclear supplies or in some way maintaining nuclear reactors. Stephen, now that US hegemony is gone, the world will get significantly more violent. This is the thing. So people say, I don't know how to put it, but yeah. People will say that if you're a civilian in Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya, it doesn't matter to you whether about USA hegemony maybe now diminishing. But again, I do think that's a bit of whataboutism about what's happening now. I haven't seen any updates on that. Welcome back, Fiona and Simon. Bill, delaying the invasion is better for Ukraine. It would have given them X months more years to build up. Just one slant of it. Why now? Okay, I can see that. If you believe that Ukraine was getting increasingly supplied and supported by the West, then the situation in terms of Russia is deteriorating. Milo, do you think this could get worse, like more than it has, or do you think it's getting less worse? It's difficult to tell because there is this fog of war. I was very disappointed. I was really hoping there would be more diplomatic connections and more diplomatic progress the day after Russian troops were advancing in Kyiv. Which was an extraordinary night. Anyone that was in the stream that night was just unlike anything I've ever experienced, and almost hard to even put myself back because it was such a strange and surreal night. But I think the day after I was really hoping for some diplomatic progress. It doesn't seem to happen, but the very fact that there are now diplomatic negotiations is a good thing in terms of for that to happen later down the line. Stephen, yeah, true, but 1945 to today has been the most peaceful and prosperous time in all of human history. Small wars in lots of countries. Yeah, again, it's, do you zoom out and look at the world as a whole, or do you zoom in? And it's a difficult one, isn't it? Brian, NATO declared that they wanted Georgia and Ukraine and let Russia take them. What's the point? I'm not sure NATO would have ever really wanted Ukraine and Georgia, to be honest, because they are buffer states. And possibly Dan Archie, possibly, yeah. Probably on Gran Turismo 7. Kent, not true. NATO is doing what it can for non-NATO countries under attack. Yeah, I think the bigger question now, I'm not sure NATO would want Ukraine as part of NATO. Because that question in the chat, sorry, the question in the poll, almost 2,000 votes. It asks an even more difficult question of NATO. Miss Sandwich, I do keep asking myself why I keep watching these streams, knowing what I wouldn't hear. Because I know you've been in quite a few of these streams, Miss Sandwich. Please don't feel like you need to watch. I can't remember where you are in the world, but you absolutely don't need to. We all, if we're not in Ukraine, we have the luxury of shutting ourselves away from this, and that's no bad thing. Matt Walker, Russia was a potential threat to NATO in 1991. The past 20 years showed they were right. I think there was definitely a deep thawing of relationships. I'm pretty sure that NATO did some joint exercises with Russia. There was a pretty extraordinary interview with the General Secretary of NATO, who was General Secretary at the time of 2001 when Article 5 was invoked, saying that he had spoken to Putin and Putin wanted to join. Question marks about whether that was a move of a chess piece in a way to dismantle NATO, but Visual, I can't stop clicking on your stream even when I try looking for other content. I end up back here. That's interesting. Wish more people do that for the iRacing stuff. See, even more, if Finland joins NATO, Russia invade. Thing is, it's not like Finland can join NATO immediately. So I would say that the more likely question is, if there is more discussion about Finland joining NATO, does Russia start antagonizing more on its northern front? Obviously, there's a big history here, and Russia hasn't been successful, depending on which way you look at it, but hasn't been successful about invading Finland before. Blackbird, yes, US even went to Russia and flew with Russian pilots to learn their aircraft. So, something I would say, it does feel like there was, when the Soviet Union fell, and this duopoly that had dominated international relations up until that point, when the Soviet Union, inverted commas, fell and broke up into different states, maybe there has been a failure of statescraft. Maybe there has been a failure of planning by the West to prevent this happening. I don't know. It's some similarities between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II. I'd love to just speak more about, if you go back to 1991, how could you prevent what's happening today? And maybe it's just unavoidable, I don't know. Susan, what's going to happen in the ISS? I don't know. I saw the UK, which has some satellites in a Russian rocket, at the moment is not going to be deploying those satellites. The ISS is reliant on Russian equipment, Russian rockets, Russian cosmonauts. So maybe it increases the speed at which it's decommissioned. Yeah, the mods are absolutely on it. Cameron, Putin could have stopped with the two eastern territories. I do, again, if Putin had limited the escalation to these eastern territories, then ultimately everything is a sliding scale if you look at it that way, and that would have been lesser on the sliding scale, possibly. Welcome, Richie. Captain Polish, the problem is that NATO isn't designed to stand up to injustice or against bullies. It's a buyer's club for military deterrence. I agree with you that if you're not in NATO, then my statement is that unless your war is so insignificant on a world war level, NATO will get involved, or could get involved. Or if your conflict is so significant it is a World War III situation, NATO get involved. If you're in the middle, then it seems like NATO won't get involved. Thanks, Jurgen. Welcome back again. Paul T, at the risk of sounding naive, there's no stupid questions in this chat. I'm not an expert. At the risk of sounding naive, if Ukraine were to announce they are no longer interested in pursuing NATO, could something this simple end it? I'd imagine it had to be some sort of signed declaration, which could always be reneged upon, like Minsk 2. I think Minsk 2 is completely dead in the water because Minsk 2 set out where kind of military artillery could be. in the east. time in these adverts. Matt Walker, any potential for Ukraine to join NATO, no matter how small, even in 50 years, unacceptable to Putin? Another kind of big question, it seems to be like a big question stream, is what would have happened if in the 1990s NATO had disbanded? Would we have seen... What would have happened in Kosovo? Would we have seen more fighting between states that would have been inherently more unstable? I don't know. Tattoo Goddess 85, it doesn't have anything to do with NATO, it has to do with the EU. Russia doesn't want them to be part of the EU. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know, actually. I mean, EU technically is not militarised. EU is a separate bloc to the United States. I think someone else can be better at explaining what happened on in the Balkans. Enrique Speed, it would probably look the same way China's sphere of influence does. Miss Samet, right now I'm focused on the human suffering more than what can happen. Yeah, it's an absolutely terrible situation, and this is the thing about, again, the United Nations' entire existence is really predicated around preventing war. And yes, it has certainly failed in a number of instances, but I don't think that makes what's happening now okay. And I feel like if the United Nations is dismantled or loses that legitimacy because states pull out, then I feel like that would be a very sad moment. Obviously, the League of Nations failed. I don't want to be a generation that we say, oh yeah, we lived in this time where there was a United Nations. Pretty much every country in the world was at it, could vote on everything. And because we've returned to kind of a multi-block world. Dylan, I believe it is partly to do with old wounds. Putin believes that the West took Ukraine from him in 2014, that the country belongs to Russia. Yeetus, nothing happening here, no war. If you want to see combat footage, there are other places to see combat footage and whatnot. Sal Victor, do you think Putin feels more threatened now that NATO troops have been deployed in the borders of Ukraine and would have even more reason not to stop? It's a difficult one. I feel like you would anticipate the sanctions and you would anticipate the mobilisation of NATO on its eastern flank. So I've struggled and I've failed to apply some sort of rationale and logic to the invasion. Jamarcus, my concern is that Zelensky will cut a deal with Shell BP once Ukraine is under NATO protection. He will make billions and become an oligarch himself with his inner circle. That's legacy. I feel like someone of that character probably would have fled. I don't know. Yeah. You can probably see me, again, over 1,000 people watching, you could definitely sort of see me fluctuate on these streams. Sometimes optimistic, sometimes pessimistic. But I feel right now I'm feeling this magnetism, gravity of nations to war, and I find that a bit depressing. Rebel Lion, look what happens when you don't have NATO protection. Yeah, this is a very clear indication of what happens when you don't have NATO protection. What that means for Moldova, I don't know. Katya, they will not take Ukraine into NATO. That's why it's all started. The main thing is that BP and Shell are leaving the Russian Federation. Savit, I suppose that Putin just wants to show his power to the world and not let Ukraine become an economical power which can supply Europe with fuel. Yeah, I don't know if Ukraine would have been a alternative to Russia in terms of natural gas and things. I generally don't know. I know pipelines go through Ukraine and transit fees are paid to Ukraine for that. Just seems that whatever was antagonizing the top of the Russian state was so severe that it justified this invasion and all of the sanctions that are being thrown back, the potential dismantling of the current international rules-based order, probably the increasing polarization of the Russian population against Western population. Who knows what, what's the word? Not consequences, like reverberations it will have around the world in terms of, oh, if Russia can do this, we can do it. TV, should we in Scotland get worried if the typhoon scrambles to usher away a Russian bear? No, I don't think that happens all the time. Tattoo, Moldova will be next and not part of EU or NATO, so no one will step in. I don't know how aligned Russia is with, Moldova is with Russia anyway. About $600 billion a year from Russia to Ukraine for the transport of gas into Europe. Definitely each stream is very different, isn't it? That Moldova has no material value to Russia. Again, question mark whether Russia would want a buffer here. Thanks, sorry, let me put those in. Keep trying to copy it, it's moving up. Yep, we'll track that one. And we'll track the IL-76. Oh, can't find that one. Raven, Moldova is asked to be part of the EU. I think Russia's going. I don't know enough about Moldova, unfortunately. All I know is it's not part of the EU. It's not part of NATO, and therefore the thresholds that NATO have shown is that it would not militarily directly support Moldova. Lee, you're all blind. That's a big statement. Crimea was first taken, but it needs mainland as well to fully operate. Possibly, I don't know. But if that was the case, you would think that unless it's a calculation that Russia really needed to advance on Kyiv through this access through Belarus, which would have split the Ukrainian attention and defence and allowed them to take this. And once they've, occupied or taken this land, then they can they're in a stronger position to negotiate a withdrawal. David, that one you can. So I missed that, David. Thanks, mods. I think it is difficult to understand what the rationale of Putin is. Does seem to be a very different way of operating to what we're used to in the West, where there are questions, etc. And obviously Lavrov goes out and Lavrov answers questions, but it's debatable to the extent he really ever answers questions, but he does put himself in front of questioning. It's hard to keep up with the chat at the moment, to be honest. Right, I've just seen this tweet come in. Oh, not tweet. Where's a tweet, actually? The time is now. Moldova officially signs the application for the membership to join the European Union. So, absolutely huge if that is, and I don't know where that's from, but if that is the case, then absolutely huge, isn't it? Moldova now also applying to join the EU, as Ukraine have done, as Georgia have done. I think it's quite symbolic because there are so many hurdles to go through. But again, puts Moldova right in the targets now. What is being done? Okay, here's a question, chat. Should NATO station troops in Moldova? Yeah, sorry, chat. You were telling me, but I hadn't seen it. Should NATO station troops in Moldova? Let's throw it up as a poll. We'll end that poll. Let me put it up as a poll so people can vote as well. No. No, it's not a NATO country. No, yes. I put in a thing if they request. No too much risk. That would be a very... Would that be an aggressive move by NATO, or would that be a defensive move? Again, it kind of depends in which context you see it, right? Blackbird says yes. Ulik says yes. Jürgen says yes quietly. Jürgen, you're from Estonia, right? Are you hoping for the same? Christopher says no, the risk is too great. Yeah, if they requested it. I mean, they've obviously made this application to join the EU, which is a clear statement. See you, Katya. Welcome, Samantha. Miss Amitz, Putin will see as a move against him. The vote is pretty much even. 138 votes, and it's pretty much even. Welcome, Pamela. Yeah, maybe it does, Chad. I don't know. I don't know enough about Moldova, but constitutions can be changed. Hayward says yes. Search destroy no. Moldova is not NATO, and that could provoke Putin to do something very bad. So I guess it would be an aggressive, defensive move. I said, what was it? One country's security is another country's aggression or something. About Moldova or just Russian troops to assault? Again, I don't know. Irritates will Finland join NATO? I don't know. I don't think Finland can join unless Sweden joins. But I think I've seen more reports out of Sweden that they are more inclined to join. I mean, the irony would be, and maybe this is a more likely end state. The irony would be that if Russia does overtake Ukraine and is able to install whatever state it wants in Ukraine, but the result is that Finland and Sweden are in NATO, the result is that Georgia's in NATO. Is that a security success for Russia? Samantha, what's the cams a bit today? A lot of military movement, a lot of artillery drops offs in the capital. What do you mean artillery drop-offs? Because interesting, when we were through the first couple of days, I had definitely thought it would be very quick before Kyiv was encircled. It does seem to be that if the resistance is around this airport, and again, even on the Zoom, you can see that there's some video footage of just absolute destruction by these hangars. If Ukraine is able to hold there, then maybe there is still a corridor, I don't know, into Kyiv. I don't know. The vote is 52%, 48%, which is a very what's the word? Symbolic number. So if it's sending a message to me. Johan, can someone tell me the disadvantage of joining NATO? You become an enemy of Russia, pretty much, it seems, de facto. You are meant to contribute a certain proportion of your GDP to defence, I believe, 2%. You become within the US sphere of influence, if you see that as a negative. Matt Trend, that's my point. Making Ukraine basically Russia puts NATO on its doorstep. So therefore, are you saying there's no that cannot be logical? Al, Putin thought Europe wouldn't be enlightened enough. He clearly guessed wrong. Because to need any Bitcoin, Ethereum stuff, because we don't know about that. So there are websites you can go for that sort of stuff. Dylan, I think it's pretty clear that the plan was to take Kyiv in a day and move before any defence or support of Ukraine can mobilise. Maybe that would be a miscalculation. But if there was inherent reluctance from the troops, if he had to really get Belarus in the right place, then maybe there were issues with getting in. We saw a couple of streams ago the really incredible footage of the paratroopers coming in the transport helicopters and attack helicopters down this river into this airbase. It's a huge amount of helicopters, and yet they were still not able to hold this airbase. I think sending paratroopers into war is always inevitably one that results in high casualties. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know enough about this region here. I don't really know enough about Moldova. Whoa. I don't really know enough about Moldova. Sorry if that was loud. Yeah, big thanks to the mods, by the way. For anyone who's engaged in discussion, doesn't matter which way you think about things, but big thanks to the mods, because mods are absolutely incredible. So this is a different map that I've seen from time to time from the I think it's the Institute for Study of War. So you can compare this to this Live UA map, and again, this is a map that shows more territory to be taken. But, for example, you know, you can see this is a highway or a road. So to what extent Russia effectively controls territory the side I don't know. But you can see here, even under this map, you know, Kyiv is not encircled. And at the moment there are, you could say, 3 fronts. There is a southern front from Crimea and from Western Russia. There is a northern front from Russia, through here. And then there is a front from Belarus, which on this map looks to have connected. Joan, how long are we going for today? I'm going to be streaming Gran Turismo 7 tonight. So we're going to be going for at most another hour. At most another hour, and then we'll be doing Gran Turismo 7, memes, emojis, music, racing. Completely different. The Deck Poker Club, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, all asking to join the EU. In my humble opinion, a chain reaction of events has already started. Just the stakes are so high. The stakes are just so incredibly high. It really does seem in some ways it's the whole EU project, and perhaps even liberal democracy is, the stakes are so high. And you have in the East, you have China and India abstaining. Cards are not played. Russia has played cards. Russia is committed. Beth, what if we are the Nazis? It seems like an incredibly distasteful thing to say. Marty, do you ever go to bed? Yeah. It's not that much difference from watching TV, is it? Samantha saying it's not a sniper. I don't know what that was. Could have been something falling off the camera. Could have been a box or something. Don't know. No, it's Miss Samich. Again, it's a really, really, really special community we have here, and it's such a rare community to have. Perhaps because it was so random that everything came together and I happened to stream and people happened to find the stream. And we have great mods who are great mods, because normally I'm racing. So if I'm racing for 8 hours, you need to have the best mods in the game, and I've always said I've had the best mods in the game. So a lot of random things have come together, I think, possibly. Jared, the first causality. Do you mean causality or casualty? That statement is interesting either which way. Rebel Lion, I'm inclined to agree the initial push led to the loss of Ukrainian air military. Putin didn't want to lose too much of his army too early on. Once Ukraine won't win this war, the difference in strength is too large. Depends if Russia kind of really calculated for Ukraine to receive as much indirect military support as it has. Taylor, did you send it to the town of Borovitsa? I think I saw, was that the drone footage? Because it just is almost unbelievable destruction. Stephen Mayhew, however, the coin has two sides, that is a fact. Many in Russia are not aware of the actual facts, and many outside of Russia are falling for their propaganda now too. I think there's definitely going to be a lot of propaganda in this war both ways. Information is such an important tool. If you can by information get in the heads of Russian conscripts advancing, then maybe we can then resolve. Maybe they will rout before a bullet is directly fired, and information is just so powerful. Johan, have you ever thought that the Ukrainian invasion is just a big diversion or a part plan to achieve something completely different? To be honest, I've never thought that. I mean, it's such a big event. I've never really thought what could be a diversion for. That just, again, we talk about the fundamentals of NATO Article 5, mutual destruction, the building blocks of what have been general peace and security. So I don't see anything bigger, but I may be wrong. I don't think there's been that many T-14s sent in. I'm not sure Russia has that many T-14 tanks, Rebel Line. T-14 is a very new tank, but I imagine they wouldn't want to be captured. But again, I may be wrong. Imagine it's more, what, T-72s, T-90s? Yeah, Matt Walker, I doubt there's a single T-14 in Ukraine. A single lost T-14 is worse than the loss of 100 T-72s. Yeah, I'd be... Again, I don't know if anyone knows that a T-14 has been captured, but... If this war had been later, then Russia would have more T-14s deployed and battle ready. D-Train, we need to revisit nuclear energy. Nuclear energy was already efficient, and we have a lot more advanced with nuclear to make it even better. Again, that's another big question. I can't remember if it was Germany that denuclearized. I think Japan is denuclearizing as well. I may be wrong on both. Thanks, Sophie. We'll check it out if there's a stratotanker. This one, it's probably just circling, I think. This plane's now going to head into Russia. Well, base, what were the large explosions last night? I don't know. I would think it would be some kind of fuel depot or ammo depot or something that would explode on the ground, but I don't know. It's such a huge explosion. Slow Joe says, cock up, not conspiracy. I do think a lot of what can be attributed to conspiracy is probably a lot of time just incompetence and mistakes, etc. I don't know. There's a name for that theory. I don't know what it is. No worries, Rebel. Sean, have to go green. It's a national security issue. It now becomes more of a national... I don't think it was ever really thought about in terms of energy independence, energy security. It was more about climate, but I think now it's both, I suspect. Occam's razor, yeah, that's it. Never attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity or something. Ryan, what do you think is more likely to happen? Escalation or de-escalation? Unfortunately, I feel like it's more likely to escalate. I feel like the path for de-escalation is so narrow and would require such incredible diplomacy by at least two nations engaged in war and then other nations who are basically also committed. How good are the diplomats? Iridex from 24th of Feb and today, Sweden's home defence has had more than double the applications compared to the entire last year. He's just a fan of diplomacy. At least there are diplomatic channels. Oh, is it Hanlon's razor? What's Occam's razor then? Just want to show anything that's stressing all. Dean, the problem with green most don't want to consider is the cost to environments it will occur as we plunder and pollute to produce those green solutions. Do you mean in a short-term sense? Because then they're short-term and long-term. Rebel, do you think the Putin demand NATO lands return to pre-97 will be upheld or more as a bargaining chip? I can't see that happening. I can't see it moving to pre-97. But again, it's this thing, if NATO's real core essence is to prevent a world war, then how do you it's very difficult. By problem solving by not compounding problems. A simple solution. Okay. A simplest answer is use the right one. Okay. 2 raises. Yeah, we're going to stream later, Melty. 2-7. Steve Moore, do we know why there's been a lack of media news in the thick of it? I think a lot of Western media teams have moved back from Kyiv. It might be something like their insurance is no longer valid or something, I don't know, but it seems to be everyone's moved back. DJ Sci-Fi, I don't think the West can stop Putin unless they want a mega hot war. Also, the sanctions will hurt Europe as much as Russia. Maybe not as much, but they will hurt Europe, I think. 1Z, over 30 countries abstained from voting on the war in Ukraine. That says a lot, guys. It does say a lot, but again, there were abstentions. They weren't votes with Russia. The only countries that voted with Russia were North Korea, Syria, Eritrea, and I think that's it. So, and 30 abstained, and the vast majority voted against Russia, so I think if you look at that, then, and you can 100% say that China and India, with 2 massive populations, abstained. But ultimately, they didn't vote with Russia. It'd be a very different position if China was voting with Russia on these things. Yep, Daniel missed there. Oh, Heather says CBS. Okay, I didn't know CBS still there. Search and destroy. Problem is most people can't accept the easy answers. They thrive on emotional, complicated exaggerations. Maybe. Hogab, how long is this ceasefire? I'm not sure if ceasefire has been agreed. I think that would be huge news if a ceasefire was agreed. Again, just checking the news. I can see. Oh, looks like the BBC might still be in Kyiv as well. Safiq, maybe people just believe what they want to believe. Yeah, maybe there is something about people believe what you want to believe. It's comforting. I don't know if there's a theory, a razor for that as well. Thanks, Danny. Yeah, we'll be there. Cameron, Putin was aiming for this to be completely done in 2 weeks from sources of ready state. Possibly. Again, not sure to what extent. Just popped on transponder. To what extent that's a leak that they wanted to be leaked or not. Again, I haven't seen a humanitarian corridor agreed. I think that would most likely, you'd imagine, be in Kharkiv. Black Hawk Reg. Is this, if you've got the... I don't think I'll be able to plug that region. Sorry, Beth, you won't be able to send links. I don't know if... It kind of feels like in these streams that there is so much debate that it possibly reflects the world. There are so many different opinions. It would be very in some ways it'd be very comforting for everyone to have the same opinion as you. And this chat is a reality that people have different opinions. And there is always conflict. And maybe that's just a reality. MK, I feel like this poll question is dangerous. It turns NATO into a form of world police. That's true, but that's how the world has been operating with the world police. GSAF, my question, if no nukes to be to use, why is Putin's nuclear arsenal high alert? Even if they are empty threats, the threats of nuclear weapons used in general reacts against ASAP, because it's a card that Russia have to play. It is a deterrent. Question marks about whether it's irresponsible to play that card. Welcome, Mikey. Gee, he will end up with a very, very unstable region. There will be unrest for decades, or as long as it is under Russian control. He's only got resources for now. I can see that you can control the resources, but not control the people. But again, even if you go down that route, is it aggressive? Is it an energy security move for Russia, or is it or is it denying that energy for Europe? I don't know. MBI, I've watched Sikorsky. Let me try and plug it in. Can't do that one. Let me see about Georgia again. More news about Georgia has since the invasion, Ukraine has applied for EU membership, Moldova seems to have applied, and Georgia has applied. Very clear statements about which way they are looking. Which I can't see anything about a humanitarian corridor. Liam, I can see them splitting Ukraine. Matt, Russia's whole doctrine is massive artillery, then armour push. What Putin is doing now is to believe that Ukraine will surrender soon. Debatable about whether we've seen massive artillery. Unless it's very scary about what's still to come. Welcome, Stephen. Liam, it seems like Russia are leaving the West Ukraine alone. You could say in terms of airstrikes, obviously Ukraine may just inherently have better air superiority here. Greater supplies coming in. It's further for the Russian troops to get to. You can't really paratroop here, so stands to reason this is going to be. And again, I do think it was such a huge difference it made for Russia to come through Belarus. Otherwise, perhaps Ukraine could have presented some kind of front here. So how do you get multiple planes? We have a gold subscription to Flight Radar, so we can do different things and have clouds up, etc. There's no no-fly zone over Ukraine, enforced no-fly zone. I think that boat sailed as soon as the invasion started, though there might have been a window to implement it before the invasion. No, Spirit, this channel is really about me racing virtual cars. That's what this channel's about. You can have a look at my channel if you want. Thanks, Rebel. Yeah, I don't know too much about this. Is it Transnistria region? I'm afraid I don't know too much about it. Joshua Kirith, will you ban anybody in the chat, especially different opinion? I've only, I think, banned maybe 3 people across these streams, 8 streams. So, no is the answer. If I was banning, you'd see me clicking this mouse a lot. The mouse is here. Click ban, click ban. Joe 1 Kane, Finnish Prime Minister and her party are about to turn the NATO issue around and support membership. In that case, it means that a majority of Finnish... I mean, there is, as we're streaming, there's great momentum here. Westward, Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia applying for EU. And I've always been sceptical about Finland, but, you know, maybe Finland and Sweden will join. But then that I do think that entrenches us more in a Cold War situation, but that's maybe where we are. Oh, if there's a view here for multi. It's a map and multi. Tom Colby, is Russia going to take Odessa? I think almost certainly, yeah. There have been reports of warships, landing craft. And again, if Odessa is being used for supplies, it's unusual to Black Sea because everything has to come through the Bosphorus. Ryan, do you think war with NATO and nuclear war has moved to exclusive? I don't know. We talked about this yesterday. Is there a threshold where NATO could engage in conventional war with Russia and both sides would not utilise nuclear weapons? I don't know. You almost don't want to go there, but theoretically, yeah, there could be a threshold. I mean, ultimately, there is generally restraint in war because Russia has nuclear weapons now they're not using. Prisoners of war have to be looked after. No use of biological, chemical weapons, etc. Yeah, if they lose Odessa, then there's no longer any supplies by sea, etc. But if they lose Odessa, what does that mean for Moldova? I don't know. Wakamali? Oh, it's 12 month sign then. That is crazy. I put out the big 12 for the 12 month. We're going to be... What's the time? Time is almost 11. We're probably going to stop the stream at about 11:15. I'm going to grab something to eat. And then we're just going to flick things over to Gran Turismo 7. And it's going to be a very different stream. Yeah, we'll see the Debt Paper Club. I've heard about that from Belarus. We will see. Blackburn, NATO, Russia, grant. Yeah, it's the risk of miscalculation. It's the risk of miscalculation, and there's no going back. And this is his point about to NATO, what is happening in Ukraine is to some extent tolerable. It's tolerable enough to not send direct or to assist directly with military intervention, because it's not worth the risk of escalating into World War III. So even though NATO would really want Ukraine to win this war, would really want lots of Russian equipment to be destroyed, cannot intervene because of the risk of things escalating into World War III. And this is the hideous position that I guess states find themselves in who are lowercase allies with NATO but not members of NATO. And now we've seen Moldova apply for EU membership, so putting itself out there, and the same with Georgia, but they're not NATO members. Turkey is a NATO member. Yeah, I'm going to grab a snack. I don't know what I should get, actually. Beth, what's the difference between an argument and a debate? It sounds like the beginning of a joke. I'm not sure there is a meaningful difference that... Yeah, I hope so, Thomas. I'm not really cut out for this, to be honest. I'm kind of a... I got into streaming, to stream racing. All I've ever seen is racing. I like racing. It's important. Heather, welcome Heather Inglis. My worry is that if he is backfired into the corner, he would use nuclear... This is a question about whether, if Russia suffers losses, whether he will be able to de-escalate or whether he will escalate his way out of that. Such as... Oh yeah, maybe. Ryan, why did you get into racing? I used to do karting. Or it's very unlikely Sweden will join NATO under current government. As far as I understand it, Finland won't be able to join unless Sweden also joins. Although Sweden has been sending anti-tank ordnance to Ukraine. Thanks, Interplayer. Yeah, thanks, someone. It does take a toll on me though, but that's something for me to work out. That's partly why I ran ads on this stream. It's the first time I've run ads, and I thought I was conflicted about whether I should do this stream tonight or just do Gran Turismo 7, which this whole channel is built on for a year. And tonight, Gran Turismo 7 is coming out. And to rationalise it, I ran ads on it for that. Lorraine, where can I see air flights? This website is Flight Radar 24. Putin's nukes are not the biggest threat. Ukraine's nuclear power plants and infrastructure are, if that goes wrong. Yeah, again, it's high stakes. I mean, I'd imagine they're highly secured and there won't be any conflict there. There will not be any resistance. But we did see tanks roll into Chernobyl and some increased data readings on the radiation levels and allegedly some delay of the handover. How about Kaliningrad? I reckon there's big eyes on Kaliningrad here in terms of Russian mobilization. Thomas 1984. I wonder, aren't we all human people? Why start wars? But I'm losing hope in humans. Think we in Sweden don't want to join anything. The chaos, but the choice is practically impossible now. It depends whether you believe humans will inherently conflict with each other or not. And I guess that is down to whether you think humans are, whether you have a realist view or an idealistic view, both humans and states. Yep, stream 277. Lorraine, why did NATO get in NATO? Why did Ukraine get in NATO? Ukraine isn't in NATO. It's not in NATO or in the European Union. There's been different governments that have been sometimes more West leaning, sometimes more Russian leaning. Yeah, Forte 10 was doing runs down here. I haven't seen Forte 10 today. Maybe not transponding. Cherry B, if war wasn't human nature, there'd already be no war. Maybe. I mean, it's not just about humans. If you kind of accept that scarcity of resources is one of the fundamental forces, just everywhere, then yeah. Oh, why didn't Ukraine join NATO? I'm not sure. Well, Ukraine signed treaties where essentially there was some neutrality. Jedi Master, countries have the right to defend themselves. Russia and Ukraine both have valid self-defense right now. There's this question about what happens when two rights conflict. And ultimately the United Nations has tried to recognise sovereignty of established borders. So, but yeah, it's to what extent was Russia provoked? To what extent are there legitimate concerns Russia has about what's been going on in Donbass? But also, to what extent does that justify this invasion? To what extent were diplomatic avenues completely exhausted? Don't know, these are big questions. I think maybe that in the West there hasn't been enough kind of attention paid to Russia, perhaps geopolitically and in relation to NATO. But I'm not sure what would have changed. I don't know. Thanks, Thomas. Let's check that. Can't find it. Maybe I stay later. Beth, there are many Soviet countries joined NATO to make people happy. Yeah, but a lot of these countries joined NATO a long time ago. A long time ago. Right, chat. It is 11 a.m. 11 a.m. It's 11 p.m. And I think I need to look at these flight paths here to Russian planes. Absolutely incredible. I think I do need to segue into Gran Turismo 7. So we'll end the stream for tonight. We're streaming every day of this war and following events. I'm a bit on edge about what's going to happen over the weekend. I have a bad feeling, but I can't explain it or substantiate it. It's that time of the stream. If you do want to subscribe, then please feel free to subscribe. Bear in mind, if you're subscribing for coverage of this, then you'll also get some racing content. If you have any other streams that you recommend, please do put them in the chat. Thanks again, everyone, for generally having a respectful place to talk about things and debate. Ultimately, if your opinion is really strong on something, in most places you will just get either removed or you'll be in an echo chamber. So that's just reality, I think. So unless you want to be in an echo chamber where everyone's just saying the same thing, or you want to be immediately removed, then we have a nice space here, but it kind of relies on everyone to to be just aware of everyone's feelings. Can't get any fried chicken because it's 11 o'clock, so they're all closed. So I'll have to cook something. Yeah, thanks everyone. If you've got any streams, put them in the chat. We're going to be back here in about half an hour for Gran Turismo 7. So if you want to, if this is all very anxious and you want to see me stream what I normally do, which is racing, it's a completely different stream, then do come back for that. You may like it. You may like it. Yeah, we're going to end the stream. So if you've got any other ones you want people to go to, put it in. If you want to come back here, we'll be streaming later. If you do want to subscribe, it will grow the channel. If you want to do that, it's up to you. That's not something I can do. I can't grow the channel. It's up to you. Right, we're going to go to our members page, which is my sim racing members page, and then we're going to be back later. PS5 is going to be on. Going to be emojis, going to be memes, going to be banter, going to be good racing. Brand new racing game. The biggest racing game in the world is coming out in less than an hour. And we're going to be there. So thanks everyone. Thanks to the mods, thanks to the community. Incredibly special place we have. I'm going to keep trying to just do my bit, just be here. And yeah, we're very, very lucky. So I'll see you all next time.
There was a wild ride. I know at the start you were curious, but my goodness, that was fast and furious. All the intensity we had, we've come to the end. Now that's too bad. But the energy threw books off the shelf, and we hope you all enjoyed yourselves. Enjoy yourselves. We will go all the way. It's not about the trend. Keep going now. Keep going till we reach the end. Till we reach the end. If you had a good time being part of this journey, and the thrill is now making you thirsty, if you want to keep seeing the action, then just drop us a like so you can come back for more. If you're new here, we welcome you with a smile. If you like what you saw, just hit subscribe. We appreciate each and every one of you tuning in to see Akira Thought. Join us for the next part. Hold